You know, that person who just disappears. No explanation, no dramatic fight, no final conversation. One day they're in your life, and the next, they're simply gone. No calls returned, no messages answered. Sometimes not even a goodbye. Everyone calls them cold, heartless, dramatic. Why can't they just talk it out like an adult? But what if cutting people off isn't coldness at all? What if it's actually one of the most misunderstood psychological responses there is?
We tend to judge people who cut others off completely. We call it extreme, we call it avoidant, we call it running away from problems instead of facing them. But underneath that behavior is usually something far more complicated than indifference. People don't typically cut others off because they don't care. They cut people off because at some point, caring became unbearable. Today, we're going to unpack the psychology behind why some people sever relationships completely rather than working through conflict, and what's actually happening beneath the surface when someone goes silent forever. Here's something most people get wrong about sudden cutoffs. The moment that triggers someone to disappear is almost never the actual reason they're leaving. It's the final straw on a pile that's been building for a long time, often silently. People who cut others off completely have frequently tried other things first. They've hinted, they've withdrawn slightly, hoping someone would notice. They've expressed discomfort in smaller ways that often went unaddressed. By the time they cut someone off entirely, they've usually already grieved the relationship internally. The silence you're witnessing isn't the beginning of the ending. It's the very end of an ending that started long before you noticed anything was wrong. From a psychological standpoint, abruptly cutting someone off is often a nervous system response, not just a decision. When a person has been in a relationship, romantic, familial, or platonic, that consistently feels unsafe, dismissive, or overwhelming, their body eventually shifts into a self-protective state. Psychologists often describe this as a shift into avoidant or shutdown behavior. The nervous system essentially concludes engaging with this person costs more than it gives. And once that conclusion is reached, complete withdrawal can feel like the only way to protect whatever emotional capacity is left. This is especially common in people who grew up in environments where conflict wasn't safe, where speaking up led to punishment, dismissal, or escalation. For them, walking away in silence isn't dramatic. It's the only form of self-protection they ever learned. For most people, conflict is uncomfortable but survivable. You argue, you explain yourself, eventually you repair. But for someone who has experienced relationships where conflict consistently led to chaos, blame, or being made to feel like the problem, confrontation doesn't feel like a path to resolution. It feels like danger. So instead of risking another painful confrontation, they remove themselves entirely. Not because they're punishing the other person, but because silence feels safer than the alternative they've experienced before. This is why people who cut others off often don't respond well to being chased or confronted about it. The pursuit itself can feel like the exact threat they were trying to escape. There's another layer to this that's rarely discussed. For some people, cutting someone off isn't just about the relationship. It's about protecting who they're trying to become. If someone has spent years in relationships where they felt small, unheard, or constantly responsible for someone else's emotions, severing that connection can feel like the only way to reclaim their sense of self. It's not always about hating the other person. Sometimes it's about refusing to keep shrinking around them. In this sense,
cutting someone off can actually be an act of self-preservation rather than cruelty, even if it doesn't look that way from the outside.
Here's the important nuance to hold on to. Cutting someone off completely isn't always healthy, and it isn't always the right response. Sometimes it avoids necessary growth or genuine repair that could have happened with more communication. But it's also rarely the cold, careless act it's often labeled as. Often, it's the response of someone who tried other ways first. Someone whose nervous system reached its limit. Someone who learned, somewhere along the way, that silence was safer than speaking up. Understanding this doesn't mean every cutoff is justified, but it does mean we can replace judgment with a little more curiosity about what someone might have been carrying before they finally walked away.
I want to ask you something honestly. Have you ever been the person who cut someone off completely? Or the person left wondering why someone disappeared without a word? Tell me which side of that experience you've lived and what you learned from it. I'd genuinely like to know.